This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. Happy Friday morning. This is our 289. These are our Calico coated bearings that I just got in. We're getting ready to I'll learn to speak English in just a few moments. We are getting ready to check, if you remember from the last video, we checked bearing clearances just to see where we were before coating, and knowing that the coating is going to reduce that clearance a little bit, I'm going to go through. Now I can check all 5 main bearings and all 8 rod bearings, and that will tell me how much that I'm going to have to polish off of my handy dandy crankshaft before it goes final assembly. We are waiting on pistons. Unfortunately, those are probably still 10 weeks away or so. Just unbelievable supply chain issues still, and I don't know if it's going to get any better. We can keep our fingers crossed, but for right now, I'm going to get these bearings washed, and I'm going to put them in our block and put them in our rods. And one of the requests from past videos was that they wanted to see more of things happening in real time and showing how to do things. So I'm going to try to do that this time. All right, so before we lay our bearings in, I usually just go over the saddles with some lacquer thinner or some mineral spirits just to make sure everything is clean. These are Calico coated Cleveite main bearings. When you get them from Calico, they come already packaged up and shrink wrapped and already coated. Obviously, these are our main cap side bearings, so that means that these are our block side bearings with the holes in them. So I'm going to get these cleaned up. Okay, same deal here. I just used some lacquer thinner. Wipe the bearings down on both sides. And then we can lay it in the block. Coating seems to leave a little bit of a residue on the bearing that needs to be cleaned. You just never assume that anything is clean. Always double check it. I would like to see how they apply this coating. I know it's sprayed on, but I don't know how they get it so perfectly uniform. But they do an excellent job of it. Okay, so main bearings are in. I'm going to do the same thing to the main cap side. And I'm guessing that you don't need to see the same process over, so I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. Okay, so we got our number 5 main cap on. I go ahead and start with the rear, just because the main housing on a 289-302 is so small that you really don't, on the bigger engines you can wiggle you can torque all the mains down and wiggle your bore mic in and check all the bearing clearances, but it's just not possible on these. This is essentially a 2 1/4 inch hole here. So ARP main bolts torque at 70 pound-feet. Since we're just doing one cap, we don't have to follow any specific sequence or anything. I just go evenly until I reach the torque value. And now I can jump back over to my crankshaft. We'll mic this rear main journal and set our bore gauge to that. Okay, so this is our outside mic. I always check against the standard to make sure that we are on the money. We are half a 10,000th out, so that is closer than what I can measure. So we're going to call that good, and now we're going to measure our rear crank journal. Okay, I'm going to try to do this on camera. This is something that you just have to get a feel for. That is our main journal diameter. I'm going to lock down at that. And now we're going to put our mic in our mic stand, and I'm going to get my bore gauge set up and set my bore gauge to 0, and then we can check our bearing clearance. Here's an interesting thing. So before I set my bore gauge up, when I checked the bearing clearances the other day on the video, just to get a rough estimate of where we were, look at my number for number 5, 2.2284. 2.2284. So over the course of, I don't know what, 2 weeks or so, I am still measuring exactly the same to the 10,000th of an inch. I think that's pretty cool. All right, so got a bore mic set up. I have to use, on these Windsors, I have to use one with a small face dial indicator, just because you get hung up right here if you don't. But we are setting at about 0019 2,000ths of an inch, which is kind of about where we expect it to be. It's not an exact, half thou difference on the coating each and every time, but just a little bit shy of 2,000ths. When you check, you always walk over to the other side of the hole just to make sure your bearing bore is straight. And when I do that, I am at about 0018. So we are straight, and I would just say that I would probably, I'm going to have the crank polished maybe 3 or 4 tenths just to get that 0022 number that I like to see, and it'll be just fine on that one. So we will go to our number 4 bearing housing or bearing bore and check them all as well. Okay, here's the measurement for number 4 main journal. When you have a really good crank grinder, this is what happens, 2.2283 and a half. So, I mean, extremely close to the last journal that we checked. Okay, so I'm showing on our number 4 journal, and we are at, I don't know if you can see that for the glare. It's hard for me to hold all this stuff. I'm about 0016 on that one. And when I walk over to the other side, I get the same thing. So I'm going to record that measurement, and we'll just have to polish just a little bit more out of that number 4 journal, and it'll be just fine. This is precision in the engine building. So you have a goal based on experience of where you want things to be. You measure, and then you change it to what you want it to be. So would this engine live at 1.5 thou main bearing clearance? It probably would, considering our main bore housing is very straight and our crank is ground very straight and round. But just out of past builds where I've tried stuff like that, I just like a little bit more clearance. And that's what we're going to do. Okay, so this is number 3 main journal. Again, 2283. Really good crank grinder. Can hold those tolerances to 1/10,000th of an inch. Makes it easy on me because I don't have to keep resetting my bore gauge. Okay, this is number 3. And we are sitting at about 0017. We'll walk to the other side. We're about 0015 on that one, so I'll record that and we will polish that amount off and we'll go to the second journal. Number 2, 2283. So got our main cap torque. We're going to check our clearance. I got a thou 6. Walk it across. Thou 6. I'll record that and we'll go on to the number 1 bearing. This is our number 1 bearing, or our number 1 main journal on our crank, 2283. So you know what that means. Crank grinder did a very good job. I'm out of sequence. I forgot to put my main cap on. Give me 1 second. Okay, here is number 1. One 5. And a little bit tighter on the other side, about 1 3. So I have to polish just a little bit more off that journal, but it'll be right. When I get the crank balanced, the pistons come in, crank will be balanced, journals will be polished, and then I'll go through and check all of these again. And that's kind of what engine building is. Again, it's not just the precision, it's a lot of monotony, to be honest. Just checking and rechecking. All right, just for checks and balances purposes, here's my Brown and Sharp outside mic, obviously not digital. Checked it against my standard. I just mic'd the number 1 crank journal. We are at 2 inches, 200, and the 0 will be 25, 26, 27, 28. And then when the marks line up, that's your tenths. So 3/10. So we are measuring exactly what we were measuring with the Mitutoyo digital mic, and that gives me warm and fuzzy feelings, and I can continue about my day in peace. All right, since our main bearing clearances are checked, then I'm gonna bag this block back up and keep it nice and clean and safe until, I need to get my finger out of the camera, and keep it nice and clean until crank comes back balanced, and then I can check it again. But for prosperity's sake, I need to keep her bagged up, pushed out of the way. Okay, so let's check our rod bearing clearances. These are our scat connecting rods that we're going to use with this engine, and these are the coated Cleveite rod bearings. I'm going to do the same procedure to these. Wash them up, wash our rods, and what we'll do on the rods, since we don't have, they're not really dedicated to a particular cylinder right now, all of the rods have identification marks on them. This is how they come from scat. So when I check a bearing clearance and basically assign it to a cylinder, say I want this to be number 1 rod, then I will mark this down on my build sheet as the identifier for number 1 rod. That way I can, when the pistons come, rotating assembly gets balanced, then I can match this one right back up to the way that it was. Okay, just as a habit, when you put your rod bearings in, you need to make sure that they don't say upper or lower on them. Some of your bearings are dedicated to one side or the other. These are not. So that means they can go in the upper end or the cap end. All right, so we got our bearings in. You use an aluminum rod vise so that it doesn't mar the material on the rod. These torque at 45 pound-feet. I've got mine torqued. We're going to slide the rod out. I've got my bore mic set. I'll get this eventually, guys. You wouldn't believe how incredibly hard this is to do with one hand. we were at 0014. So about the same deal. We have to polish the crank on these to get the clearance that we want. So I want to end up somewhere around the 2000s mark for bearing clearance. No need to bore you on the rest of this. I'm going to mark this identifier down as number 1, record the clearance, and then go on to the other 7. Alright, so this is what we ended up with. Pretty much all around the same, give or take a tenth or 2, which is pretty good. But it does show that we're going to have to take some meat off the crankshaft in order to make these clearances work. I'll probably drop the crank back off at my crank grinder, because trying to polish out, 7 or 8 tenths gets a little dicey. So it's better to do that with a grinding wheel so that everything stays round and true. So we'll get that done, and we got some time since the pistons are not here yet. Coming up the pipe for Mr. Roger, or 427, we're going to start the mock-up and everything, hopefully this time next week. He's got a new pond FE block, and these are his rods and pistons, custom race techs, with a 5cc flat top, scat H-beam rods, and that'll be a nice little 427 medium riser for his Cobra replica. We got some factory medium riser heads and a sidewinder intake, and it'll be a nice build. So we'll get started on that one, and I'll have some more videos for you. As always, I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. It's big support for me, and I thank you for that. Hope you learned something as well, and hope you have an excellent weekend. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and those like buttons help me out quite a bit. Thank you all again for watching. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye.